one night years ago when my kids were 2, 5, and 7, our family had gone to Barton Creek Mall just to walk around. Now, this is not a mall we know because Barton Creek Mall is a long ways away, and we rarely went there, and I don't even know why we had decided to go there. But we were at Barton Creek Mall walking around, and the announcement came over the PA system that the mall would soon be closing for everybody to make their way to the exits. We were in the mall, and we had parked outside Dillard's, so we head to Dillard's. And Chris, who was 5, thought he knew exactly where we had parked. And he knew he wanted to get there first, so he took out running. Now, we weren't too worried about it, except as he took out running, the store looked a little different than when he had come through it before. And so he went out the door he thought was where our car was, but it wasn't. And at Barton Creek Mall, that was in a completely different parking lot. And we weren't too worried till we got to the car and he wasn't there. And it was dark because it was not daylight savings time. So we went back into the store. We've lost our 5-year-old son. And so they said, well, we'll make an announcement. So over the PA system, you hear, lost boy in Dillard somewhere. And they told me that he could be hiding in any of the clothes rounds throughout the store, and we might not find him for hours. And I thought, wonderful. I'm thinking, surely Chris wouldn't do that, but Well, it wasn't too long before the security guard outside called and said he had found a little boy walking around the parking lot crying. And so he put Chris in his truck and brought him to us. And I will never forget walking out that door and seeing Chris looking scared to death in this truck, this big old white security truck with the light on it. And he's just crying, and he was so scared. And we were so relieved. We didn't have to say a word to him about running off from us. He had suffered the consequences fully. All we did was just hug him and love on him. Now, Chris didn't mean to get lost. He thought he knew what he was doing, and he knew what he wanted, which was to get to the car first and to show everybody else that he knew how to get there, and he didn't need any of our knowledge to know how to do that. So he took off, but before he knew it, he was lost. I think that happens to lots of us. We think we know what we want and what we think we deserve, and we go looking for that only to find out we're lost. It's like we go looking for love in where? Look, y'all know that. All the wrong places. But what is it that we really want? In another one of those 80s movies I've been talking about recently, Scarface. Anybody see Scarface? Oh, not very many people here. Al Pacino, yeah. Okay, well, it's a story about a Cuban refugee named Tony Montoya, and he's a drug cartel kingpin. And so there's one scene where he's cruising the streets with his friend Manny, and Manny says, I say, Tony, be happy with what you got. And Tony says, you be happy. Me, I want what's coming to me. And Manny said, well, what's coming to you? And Tony says, the world, Chico, and everything in it. The world and everything in it. Do we ever think that that's what we really deserve? Long before Tony Montoya ever said, I want what's coming to me, Jesus told a story about a young man who essentially said the same thing, except not to his friend, to his brother. Jesus' famous story starts like this. There was a young man who had 2 sons, and the younger said, Father, give me my share of the estate. In other words, I want what's coming to me. Now, what you may not realize, in that day, a son asking for his inheritance early was the worst insult possible. A son was expected not only to wait until his father had died to receive his inheritance, but he was to care for his father in his old age. So the son asking for his inheritance was like the son was saying, Dad, I don't care whether you live or die. You don't mean anything to me. Just give me what I deserve, and I want it now. It was a huge, huge offense. Now, before we cast this son aside as, ungrateful and selfish, and let's consider whether what he said out loud is what most of us feel. Don't we sometimes feel that life isn't giving us what we hope for or what we think we deserve? Kind of like Tony and Scarface, we want everything. Now, what I'm getting ready to say may surprise you, but thinking and feeling you want something more is what you should feel. That's the way we were created. Now, not that everything we desire is good for you, absolutely not. But things like longing for a love that will last, having a purpose for living, our need to make a difference in the world, trying to make sense out of the hard things in life, all those longings come from God. Erwin McManus writes in his book, Soul Cravings, all of us long to become something more than we are. We are driven to achieve, moved to accomplish, fueled by ambition. Now, it burns hotter in some of us than others, but we're all searching for our unique purpose, our divine destiny. You see, we are hardwired with these longings. We want to have a purpose. We want to make a difference in the world, to be someone who's valued and respected. Our problem isn't that we have those longings. The problem is that we seek to fulfill them on our own without God. Bob Buford, in his book, writes, one of people's greatest fear is running out of money. But honestly, that's not the greatest fear. Another significant fear people have is fear of dying. But that's not people's greatest fear. Deep down, our single greatest fear is to live a life of significance, to come to the end of our life and feel like we never really did anything that mattered. That is our greatest fear. Now, I tell you, I've been with a whole lot of people at the end of their life. And the one thing that matters is whether they made a difference and whether they loved people. And I hear that over and over and over again. It does not matter how much money they have. It does not matter how successful they were professionally. What matters to them as they're getting ready to see Jesus face to face is whether they shared love with people and whether they made a difference in the world. You know, I think we all have that desire, but our perception of making a difference sometimes can get skewed, and sometimes we get off track and we go about it in unhealthy ways. The son in Jesus' story was like so many of us. He was convinced that he could fulfill his longings away from his father, on his own, not having to think about anybody except himself, and then he would finally be happy. So we're told he set off for a distant country. Now, we aren't given details about what happened in that distant country, except that he squandered his wealth in wild living. We're kind of left to imagine what wild living in Jesus' day was like. But in the story we're told today, maybe they would have gone to like Las Vegas or Amsterdam or some place that was really wild. And I can imagine it was a journey that included parties with binge drinking into all hours of the night and women who are willing to satisfy every possible desire. What he discovered was that it left him empty, completely empty. You know, the reality is that when we knock on the door of some self-destructive behavior or relationship, we typically find that it's empty. Or when we work so hard to get what we think we want and deserve, sometimes we find that success is not what we thought it was. Not long after Tom Brady won his third Super Bowl championship ring, he was interviewed for 60 Minutes, and they asked him what his success had done for him, and he said, "Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater for me out there? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey man, this is what it is. I've reached my goal, my dream, my life." Then he said, "Me, I think, God, there's got to be more than this." At least on that one day, in spite of his accomplishments, Tom Brady was looking for something more. Working hard and accumulating things and money, climbing some ladder, none of that will satisfy the deepest desires of our hearts. So when the younger son realized that his longing for things wasn't satisfied in wild women and his longing for purpose wasn't found in partying, he started asking questions. Why didn't this turn out like I thought it would? Why am I so lonely, broke, and unhappy? Why am I so empty, and how did I end up in a place like this? You ever felt that way? The story of the lost son is each one of our stories. Some more or less dramatic, some more or less painful. Many of us have tried to fill our souls with something other than God. And we end up moving away from God without even realizing it. And before we know it, we're lost like Chris was that night. We don't mean to run away from God. But somehow we end up doing that. Years ago, when Grace first moved to this property, the only thing on this property was this stone house and a barn out back. And we had a gravel driveway. And we had lots of stuff around from this old farm that was sitting on the back porch. And one evening for worship, this very classy lady walked in. And she walked in the back door, which meant she climbed over all that trash. And I remember we all went, because just to see her, she was gorgeous. She was well put together. She was dressed very nicely. She reeked of success and self-confidence. We quickly became friends. We went to lunch that week. Robin had spent many years off in a distant country. Not meaning around the world, but away from God. She had partied hard and had lots of financial and professional successes. But one day she was driving down Gaddis School Road and she saw, when I think about it, our wooden sign that was hand-painted that really looked bad. And it had the name of a woman pastor. And she thought, maybe I could connect with a woman pastor. And so there was this longing in her soul for something more. And she came. Now, Robin had had a child when she was 16. While living with her mother, who had had her when she was 16, her mother had never married. Robin did not marry till she was about 45, having lots of relationships with many men. Her son was not living with her because he was in a boarding school because of his rebellious behavior. She finally committed to Ray right before she came here. I shared many meals in their home. They were a delightful couple. Ray didn't come to church, but he totally supported her in her newfound faith journey. I so remember one time, some of you may remember this, we were helping a family that had just immigrated here, and they didn't have any household belongings, so we were collecting household belongings, and Robin said, oh, I have a bunch of boxes we haven't opened here, take them. So we're there unloading, one of these youth comes up and brings me this box. She's like, Nancy, look in here. There's all this drug paraphernalia. And first of all, I didn't honestly know what some of it was until the youth told me what it was. That's the truth, Kirk. And I won't tell you who it was that knew what it was. But anyway, I just kind of laughed, and I said, let me take that. And I took it to a dumpster. And I didn't want Robin to know because I thought she would just die of embarrassment if she knew I'd found all that stuff or that the church had found that. But she had changed so much when she came here. She was very active in our church in Bible study, doing mission work, and any kind of building and grounds project day we had. We used to do tie bow to a tape 2 or 3 times a week, which was always fun. And her faith grew and grew and grew. And then one day she developed this bad cough that just wouldn't go away. Her cancer had returned. She had had cancer years and years before, and it had metastasized to her lungs. She lived about 6 months. During that time, her faith was so strong, and she never quit giving of herself. I still remember, I think I told this recently about her coming to the waiting room at the hospital one night when another woman in our church was dying. That's about 3 weeks before she died, and she was so sick. But she wanted to be there to support this family of this 28-year-old who was dying. She was all about doing things for other people and sharing love. And her husband's faith started to grow. In fact, he used to tell, right at her last day, he said to me, he said, Nancy, Grace has been Robin's Garden of Eden. She found peace and wholeness when she came here, and her life changed. He said, all the struggles she had through all her life, it's all gone away, and she's so peaceful. After we did her funeral here, we did it out back in the yard, because we didn't have much. It was not nice. And I kept thinking this, very classy lady who lived in this gorgeous home in Forest Creek is having this funeral out in the backyard with folding chairs, and, but she would have loved it. But then he flew me to Atlanta to do the funeral there for their friends there. And huge church, huge turnout, and people were shocked when I told them about her life because they knew Party Robin. Now, she'd always been loving and kind and all that, but she was a wild woman. But she was not what she came here. And she was so fulfilled, and she found peace for her soul. You know, I think sometimes the reason Jesus told this story is to help each of us find our way back to God. We may have moved just a little bit, or maybe we moved a long way. Maybe we feel close to God on Sundays, but then on Mondays we're like, God, are you there? Well, I'm going to go do this, and this. This story is for us, but it causes us to think, where will we go to satisfy those deep, God-given longings that we all have? Where will we go? And will the things we do draw us closer to God or away from God? Imagine what it would be like not to run after love anymore. Can you even begin to imagine what it might feel like to experience longing fulfilled? I challenge you this week to pray a very simple prayer every day. It's in your bulletin. I'll have it on Facebook and send it out on email. It's on the back of your bulletin. And the prayer for this week is short, so it'll take you 30 seconds. God, if you are real, make yourself real to me. Awaken in me the ability to see that you're what's missing from my life. I challenge you to pray that prayer every day this week and see what happens. See how you start to experience God's presence in your life. I think you will find that God has right there. He never moved away. We just did. Know that God is waiting. Let us join together in prayer. Gracious God, we're so grateful that you love us no matter how many times we run away, or no matter how many times we're so confident we think we know where we're going and we end up away from you. But God, create in us a deep longing to be close to you. Reveal yourself to us in powerful ways and fill those longings of our hearts. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.